Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Wednesday, March 23rd. And if you would like additional weather information, you can always go to weather.gov/Alaska. When you bring up this site, though, you'll see the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left there. And it's a point-and-click map. It allows you to get watches, warnings, advisories, and much more from across the country right now, at least this afternoon. There is a tornado watch that is in effect for portions of Ohio, West Virginia, southwest Pennsylvania. Severe weather there. Winter storm warnings continue for portions of upper Michigan and the Arrowhead region of Minnesota. And still fire red flag warnings, fire weather issues down there in South Texas. But in our area, we have winter weather advisories that will continue in effect northwest Arctic coast as well as the eastern Arctic coast into tomorrow morning and as late as Friday morning. The North Pacific low track is going to be kind of pushing up into the Gulf every 2 to 3 days. So we'll see a little more active weather at times down through the Gulf. There's going to be a bout of some heavier precipitation, heavy snow in the coastal mountains there, the Kenai Peninsula, and surrounding Prince William Sound, so that could increase the risk of avalanches if you are going to be heading out into the backcountry. Definitely want to check some of the local avalanche warning centers to make sure if there are any heightened advisories or warnings. And then we do anticipate above normal temperatures and precipitation returning to the southwestern portion of the state here as we close out this month and head through early April, and I'll show that toward the end of the show. In the meantime, though, we have these winter weather advisories for some light snow and blowing snow there. Point Hope on up toward Wainwright through 6 a.m. Thursday morning. And then for the eastern half of the Arctic coast, Prudhoe Bay on over to Kaktovik, we anticipate snow and blowing snow, wind gusting 45 miles an hour with wind chills to 50 below overnight through early Friday morning. So it'll be a little tougher going there. Central interior areas, though, including the interior highways such as the Dalton, Elliott, and Steese highways, could see blowing snow if you're crossing through some of the summits there in the central, eastern, and interior. So keep that in mind as there are stronger winds thanks to an area of high pressure that's way up the Arctic Ocean that's going to be building southeastward into the Canadian Arctic coast. Meanwhile, we have another low that's going to lift out of the North Pacific up into the southwest quadrant of the Gulf, and that pressure gradient are going to keep winds up in portions of the state. Dead Horse, you can see light snow and blowing snow this afternoon, a little bit of fog, 12 below zero. Again, winds could gust as high as 45 miles an hour there with blowing and drifting snow tonight through early Friday morning. Down in Kenai Peninsula, Seward, some light snow, 34 degrees, but the mountains there are going to see some heavier precipitation moving in there, especially tomorrow. Coastal areas will get rain, but the mountains will pick up 1 to 2 feet of snow there. Portions of the eastern Kenai on up in the mountains, coastal mountains surrounding Prince William Sound. Looking at the satellite imagery, you can see circulation that's kind of there around Shelikof Strait, just north of Kodiak. That's pulling back toward Bristol Bay and weakening. But at the bottom of the screen, you'll see some enhanced cloudiness there in the center of the screen at the bottom. That's the next low that's going to be lifting northward into the lower Gulf tomorrow, and then that's going to retrograde back toward the north and west by Friday toward Kodiak Island, and that's going to be the system that's going to bring some heavier snowfall to the coastal mountains as we go through the end of the week. So there's this afternoon low there, kind of Shelikof Strait, going to retrograde westward toward Bristol Bay and weaken another weaker low south of there. But the hint of the next low at the bottom of the screen, that'll be lifting northward later tonight, early on Thursday morning. And that's going to begin to spread more precipitation up across the Gulf Coast region. And as we go through Thursday, we expect by Thursday afternoon a stronger low, not especially strong, but at least a little stronger one, southeast of Kodiak Island, and that will continue to pinwheel back toward the west-northwest, be located right along the Kodiak Island coast there by Friday afternoon, with an occluded front extending northward up into the northern Gulf. Along that front, there'll be some strong winds just above the surface, so there could be some wind shear for pilots for flying there along the coast, as well as turbulence, because we do anticipate storm force winds there, especially around just south of Prince William Sound, and once you get into the north central open waters of the Gulf. Lows Thursday morning will stay above freezing, generally speaking, there through the lower portion of the Panhandle and the outer areas. The interior will see lows still dipping down below freezing, teens, say Copper River Basin, 20s around Anchorage, Kenai. And then temperatures, though, Thursday afternoon could be up near 40 degrees or so, because we have the higher sun angle now this time of year, so we're going to see the melting continue. And as the next system, clouds will be on the increase as well from south to north. Areas of the Panhandle will be up into the 40s, and then Friday morning lows will be a bit higher as that push of milder air comes in off the Gulf. We expect lows to be generally around or above freezing from Anchorage southward, and certainly along the coast with high temperatures. Friday afternoon getting up into the 40s, even all the way up to Talkeetna there. So should be mainly rain along coastal areas, but the mountains will see locally some heavier snow. Colder temperatures, though, along the Arctic coast, but they are moderating in the teens below zero, and not quite as cold as they've been here. Daytime highs should get back up into the 20s, even on the south side of the Brooks Range and along the Yukon River. And if not Thursday afternoon, Fairbanks will be flirting with freezing or so, and warming further as we go through the end of the week into the weekend. Morning lows Friday morning still sub-zero, Yukon Flats along the Arctic coast. But then Friday afternoon it should get above freezing there in Fairbanks, and temperatures moderating along the Arctic coast to the single digits, perhaps above zero, and 20s becoming more widespread even in the western portion of the state and along the Yukon River. Thursday morning, we're going to see lows still in the single digits, above or a bit below zero there in the interior of the Southwest, and below freezing along the Alaska Peninsula. But by Thursday afternoon, temperatures still could stay a bit below freezing there, portions of the central Alaska Peninsula, but the interior starting to get back up near freezing, and with downslope flow off the western side of the Alaska Range, we expect some temperatures to be above freezing. For Friday morning, lows will be recovering back up into the teens there across the southwest interior, and then afternoon highs on Friday should get back up around or above freezing along and just west of the Alaska Range, including Dillingham and King Salmon, and also readings coming up across the central portion of the peninsula, and certainly as you get out toward Dutch Harbor westward. And looking at the temperature outlook, the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for March 29th into April 2nd, as we transition to April. A bit above normal temperatures there along the southwest coast, Bristol Bay area. Still a little below normal there along the north slope, but as we go into the 8 to 14 day outlook, March 31st through April 6th, we see that expanding across the southwestern portion of the state. So we do anticipate at least above normal temperatures to start out early April. And as we look at precipitation there, the 29th through April 2nd, you can see a little above normal precipitation, especially the southwest interior. And then as we go into March 31st through April 6th, precipitation may average a little above normal to begin the month of April. And as we anticipate the transition to spring, we're gaining like 5 minutes of daylight a day. So this is going to have to be watched, because we are approaching the river breakup season. We are going to be having reports on that coming up each Thursday for 4 weeks once we get into the second week of April.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
It's now time for your aviation weather. If you're planning a flight Thursday into Friday, the two main weather features to keep an eye on will be a low pressure that will be lifting out of the North Pacific up into the lower central Gulf, and then that's going to retrograde north and westward back toward Kodiak Island by Friday afternoon. Meanwhile, big area high pressure up there in the Arctic Ocean. Beaufort Sea is going to slide southeastward and move inland along the Canadian Arctic coast, and this is going to keep a tighter pressure gradient along the north slope Arctic coast, as well as down along the Alcan border. So we also expect some stronger winds and turbulence there through the Gulf associated with a lower wind feature, lower atmospheric wind feature with the low pressure there. But Thursday morning, we expect IFR conditions to be expanding northward through the Gulf by afternoon. They'll encompass Prince William Sound along the lower portion of Cook Inlet and out across northern Kodiak Island. And then for Friday morning, we expect much of the same areas also extending back toward the southwest into Bristol Bay, Lake Iliamna. And then off to the far north, we do expect still some winds holding up and some blowing snow there along the Arctic coast, though MVFR conditions. But by Friday afternoon, we expect IFR conditions there along the Arctic coast between Utqiagvik and Katovik. And then along the Gulf Coast, rather widespread IFR conditions from Bristol Bay through Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound eastward to along the outer Panhandle coast. Pass conditions, Anaktuvik Pass will see VFR conditions Thursday, as will Adigan Pass as we drop a little further down toward the west side of the Alaska Range. We do expect MVFR conditions, at least in the morning, Lake Clark and Merrill, giving way to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Same thing at Rainy Pass, MVFR becoming VFR, as will be the case at Windy Pass. Little MVFR conditions in the earlier morning becoming VFR. And as we go further east along the eastern Alaska Range, Isabel will see MVFR conditions also become VFR, as will Mentasta Pass. And then a little further south, we do expect Tanita Pass just to generally remain MVFR on Thursday. And along the Gulf Coast closer there, Portage Pass will generally see IFR conditions. The eastern half, including Prince William Sound, will stay in IFR conditions, whereas the west entrance, maybe western third of that pass, will remain VFR. And finally, for the northern panhandle, Chilkoot and White should be able to enjoy VFR conditions throughout the day on Thursday. Freezing levels, the air is not especially warm, but seasonal temperatures for this time of year as we get into the latter half of March. We expect the surface freezing line to run along the outer coast there of the Panhandle up through the northern Gulf Coast, just off of Kodiak Island, dipping south again of the Alaska Peninsula and then crossing the eastern Aleutians and rising up into the central Bering. And the aloft freezing line of 2,000 feet creeps a little bit north and west of Haida Gwaii out into the lower Gulf. As a push of moisture and a little milder air ahead of that low pressure will cause an area of precipitation rather widespread, so we do expect a potential for some considerable moderate icing between 3,000 and 12,000 feet across the Gulf, especially by Thursday later morning and afternoon, and that will bump up against the east side of the Kenai Peninsula and eastern Kodiak Island. As far as upper level winds, we do have a weak low circulation there south of Kodiak Island. Otherwise, the strongest jet core, anticyclonically curved jet core, is out there through the central Aleutians in excess of 125 knots, reaching 155 knot max. But dropping down to mid-levels, we can see the low-pressure circulation, one of them at least, just down the south end of Kodiak Island, with stronger winds of 60 to 75 knots coming in across at 9,000 feet through the Kenai from the southeast, and then bringing it down to 3,000 feet. This is more important because this is closer to a lot of interest there along the Gulf Coast. We can see winds 65 to as high as 75 knots coming in there on the east side of the Kenai and just south of Prince William Sound. This is going to translate to turbulence as well as low-level wind shear along an occluded boundary that'll be rotating its way slowly northward. So we expect the greatest threat for some isolated severe turbulence there across the length of the Gulf ahead of this low pressure. Surface to 6,000 feet with areas of low-level turbulence. We also see considerable moderate turbulence along and just south of the Brooks Range between the surface and 4,000 feet, and then also along the eastern and central Aleutians from the surface to 4,000 feet. So that wraps up your flight weather. If you do have a flight, manage to get out, have a safe one.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
We're going to wrap up the show now with our marine weather segment, and starting with the sea ice edge. Here's an example of the ice the way it was on March 19th, and here we are today, March 23rd, and you can see the southward push of the ice. We've had a persistent northerly component to the winds across the Bering, especially the west side of the state, for some time now, and so that has allowed the ice to move all the way around St. Paul, and it will continue to kind of sit in this position for a while longer. We do anticipate, at least though, temperatures are going to be moderating, so there'll be some melting there as we go into the end of this month and certainly early April. Looking across, though, the Panhandle, for Thursday, we have gale force winds along the outer coast, 40 to 45 knots from the southeast to east, with waves building in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 feet. The inner channels, winds will be out of the southeast to south, as high as 25 knots with a gust of 45 knots at Petersburg, and waves could be as high as 8 feet there at Dixon Entrance. As we go into Friday, winds will turn, well, they'll come down in strength, but also turn a bit there to the north, 25 knots in the northern portion, Lynn Canal there, but offshore 20 knots and 35 knot gusts at Petersburg. Still southeast winds 25 knots at Metlakatla and Ketchikan. Along the outer coast, winds will be out of the south, generally in the 20 to as high as 30 knot range. Stronger winds, 35 knot gales as you get from around Yakutat westward. And then across the northern Gulf and northwest portion of the Gulf, off the Kenai, we are going to see winds as high as 50 knot storm force winds there south of Cordova there over the open waters of the Gulf, with waves as high as 20 feet. Otherwise, 40 knot winds off the Kenai and lower Cook Inlet to northeasterly, 40 knot gale force winds with waves running 14 to as high as 18 feet south of Seward. And then on Friday, look for southeasterly winds along the open waters of the Gulf at 25 to 30 knots, waves around 16 feet. Easterly winds in Prince William Sound with 6-foot waves, and winds will be at the mouth of Cook Inlet out of the northeast at 30 knots and waves running around 10 feet. Now across Kodiak Island on Thursday, we're going to see low pressure just to the east of there. So north winds coming down Shelikof Strait at 30 knots. Otherwise, the counterclockwise circulation turns the wind northwesterly, at least downwind of the peninsula there in the North Pacific at 30 knots, waves 6-7 feet, and variable winds around 10 knots over Bristol Bay. For Friday, the low will continue to situate itself right around Kodiak Island. You see the counterclockwise circulation there. Winds will be northwesterly on the North Pacific side, the downwind side of the Alaska Peninsula, but out of the west-northwest to 30 knots on the Bering side with waves at 5 to 8 feet. The eastern portion and central portion of the Aleutians on Thursday will generally see winds out of the northwest, strongest winds 35-knot gales, vicinity of Dutch Harbor on Alaska. Areas further west, the winds turn westerly there between Adak and Shemya at 20 knots. And then on Friday, there's going to be another low creeping up from the North Pacific, at least up approaching the western half of the Aleutians. So we're going to see winds turn southeast to east across the eastern and central Aleutians, picking up to as high as 35-knot gales on the North Pacific side with waves of 8 to 12 feet. Across the west coast and southwest, we'll still have a northerly component to the wind, but not as strong as it has been in previous weeks. And certainly we'll expect winds in the 10 to 15 knot range over the ice. Ice should just kind of hold in place. And then for Friday, expect winds to try to turn a little more southwest to west around 15 to 20 knots, especially south of St. Lawrence, west of Nunavik Island, and in the vicinity of St. Paul. Along the Arctic coast, stronger winds there, 30 to 40 knot winds, creating blowing and drifting snow for Thursday. Offshore flow, easterly winds 25 to 30 knots. Wainwright southward down through the lower Chukchi Sea. And then on Friday, we'll continue to see brisk easterly winds 35 to 40 knots, especially Prudhoe Bay toward Katovik. But look for winds to turn a little more northeasterly around 20 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea before turning westerly on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And a quick check, low pressure Thursday will be approaching Kodiak Island. And that's all the time I have tonight. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.